You didn't know there'd be math on a Monday morning, did you?
I had no idea. That's a terrible question.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Phillippe Bishop with Alpenfire Cider. Phillippe, welcome to the show. I appreciate you getting here early on a Monday morning with coffee in hand. So why don't you tell our audience a bit about your story first, then we'll go into Alpenfire. So how's that?
Sure. My name is Phillippe. I am co-owner of Alpenfire Cider. I don't really know where to go from here.
Okay. Well, that's a great intro. We'll just start with that. So how long have you been with Alpenfire?
Let's see. We started planting our trees back in 2003, and I was there for walking in front of the tractor and tossing giant boulders out of our glacial till soil at that point. So,
all right. Well, I got to interrupt you because you don't look like you would have been old enough in 2003 to be tossing giant boulders. How old were you? How old were you back in 2003?
Oh,
you didn't know there'd be math on a Monday morning, did you?
I had no idea. That's a terrible question. 2003. I was probably 23, 22, something like that.
You look much younger.
Oh.
You look much younger. Okay. Okay. So I guess you could throw giant boulders back then. Okay. All right. Teasing.
I was in much better shape then. I don't think I could do it now.
So back in 2003, you started planting trees. When did Alpenfire Cider, was that when you guys opened for business, or when did, because you guys are one of the earlier cider makers in Washington State, and we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. But so when did you guys officially open?
Roughly, it was kind of a multi-year process. Trees went in the ground first. We then started experimenting. We officially opened to the public in like 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. Okay. It just takes years to get trees going, you know. Sure. And we went that route instead of kind of just buying juice and that route. So your co-owner, who the other owners are? My parents, Bear and Nancy.
Okay, and they kind of have, I mean, publicly, they kind of their introduction to cider is relatively interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was a long time kind of a interest of theirs. High school sweethearts, actually like prom king and queen, all these kind of things. You wouldn't know it by looking at them now or even back then, but they would sneak off up into Canada when they were, underage in the US and drink cider up there, and fell in love with the French stuff that they could find up there, but also were like, wow, this stuff that coming in a big 2-liter plastic bottles is great. Also, it's a great introductory and super sweet and fruity, and so kind of got both sides of the cider world going, from the traditional French stuff and the more modern adjunct driven kind of ciders, and then it was just kind of always in the back pocket of like, oh well, we should, it'd be great to start a cidery, that'd be fun. And my dad was a wildland firefighter for many years. My mom owned a marine canvas shop in town, and during all this thing, they, it was always that back in the brain, like, oh, it'd be fun to do this. It'd be fun to do this. And, it was roughly early 2000s. They were like, well, why don't we do it? They had a small piece of land 5 acres in Port Townsend, and they're like, well, we could just, nobody's really doing this right now. There was like 2 or 3 cideries in Washington that they had known about, and they're like, well, it'll be fun. It'll be a small little, small farm project. And
what could go wrong?
Exactly. Farming in, yeah, exactly. So she just kind of took some cider making classes, went and toured Spain, France, and England, and kind of just jumped in with both feet. And at the time I had just finished up, I did about 10 years of wildland firefighting as well. And I just kind of finished that, and I was doing architectural salvage, and I was like, it was just this weird mesh of like things meshing together. I don't know.
So
yeah.
When were you introduced to cider? How did your, I'm going to guess your parents introduced you. So how did they introduce you to cider?
Well, they actually moved to Port Townsend to build a boat, was the initial thing. And so we built a sailboat. I grew up on that, kind of through middle school and a little bit of high school. And then that's when we kind of got our chunk of land. But during that time on the boat, we'd go sailing up into Canada, and I was introduced to cider up there kind of in the same way, where it was like super sweet and, oh, this tastes like peaches with apple juice kind of, and this tastes like, strawberries with apple juice, and it comes in giant bottles. And, I was like in 4th or 5th grade, just like taking little sips during dinner or something like that. And it's just like, this is really interesting.
Okay.
And then as we started going, and I became kind of legal to drink in the US, I fell into more of the kind of craft beer scene in Washington. Really enjoyed what was going on there. And so I was always kind of on the outskirts of it, and then started drinking ciders imported specifically from like the UK. And that's where it really got me hooked. Was this heavy bittersweet quality of leather and tannins, and farmhouse just funky. And it was just like, this is such a unique drink. And there's nothing like it in the US. And as we started to release ciders, it was like, oh, this is where we're getting the influence from, is these kind of producers from the UK and like France, where it's heavy tannin driven, not so much acid driven like you see currently in the US. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I came into it, and ended up working for a beer distributor for a couple of years, helping them with their cider portfolio and doing warehouse stuff and sales calls and kind of learning that side of it. And then just kind of was like, well, we need a lot more help on the sales side. So I just went back to self-distribution, and have been doing that since about 2013, 14, 15, something like that. Every year is blending together. I don't know.
It all blurs together. And then we had COVID in, and we don't know where we are. Okay.
Yeah. It's somewhere in the 2030s, right? Is that where we are?
Yeah, exactly. And it's Monday in 2030. Yeah. Perfect. Where did my life go? Let's go back to when you decided you were going to plant trees on this parcel. What type of apples did you plant initially, and has that changed through the years, or did you get it right the first time?
uh, well, it was a lot of a trial and error in tasting of like single varietals and going, oh, that's a really unique flavor in this apple, and it's nothing like you can get from the apples that are so common in Washington. And it was just like one of those things where we're balancing what we could get readily in Washington versus what kind of nobody knew about in like classic cider apples.
Give me an example.
For instance, like the Dabinet. It's an English bittersweet cider apple. You do a single varietal of it. It's really common to pick up like a melon flavor. Like a honeydew. I think it's a honeydew. And like you'll get it with English Dabinets. You'll get it on the East Coast, Midwest, West Coast. It's just this amazing little thing that you pick up. It was like, oh yeah, well, we can't get that in Red Delicious. So Dabinet is like one of the ones that we were like, oh yeah, we got to plant this. So we ended up planting Dabinet, Filbury, Brown Snout, Yarlington Mill, Kingston Black, Muscadet de Dieppe, and
would you
Fox
say
Club.
that 3 times fast?
Muscadet de Dieppe.
I couldn't catch that. I'm gonna have to slow that way down. What is? Let's talk about that one since I can't pronounce it. What's that one?
It's an early season bittersweet, and yeah, we've never done like single varietal trials on it.
Okay.
But it is a kind of a key character in our Pirate Spike, which is kind of our early season cider apple blend that we release every year. Extremely dry, yet still incredibly fruity, and has this perceived sweetness in it that is really unique.
Okay.
It's an interesting apple because it gets really slimy as you press it, and it's not very kind of fun to work with, but it has the characteristics that we're looking for in a good bittersweet apple. I don't know really where to go.
You're not selling that one. I mean, it's slimy to work with. You're just not selling it, but that's okay. It's all good.
But the trees do well in our climate because they're, I mean, most of the apples are in like northern France or southwestern England, which is roughly, it's a very similar climate to what we get in like Western Washington. So very rain driven, and like a maritime climate. I mean, that's what, and us being,
that was going to be one of my questions, is how these trees adapted to the seasonality in the weather up. Because Port Townsend, you guys get some serious weather in there. I love Port Townsend. Port Townsend's a great place, but every time I go there, it seems like it's supposed to be sunny today, isn't it? It's not sunny today. How come it's not? It's
we'll get 10 minutes of it, and it'll be.
Oh, that's why I missed it. I was only 10 minutes. On what day of July do you get that 10 minutes of sun so I can get there next time, will you?
15th. It's always on my birthday for 10 minutes.
It's always on July 15th? Oh, you get 10 minutes of sun for your birthday. Perfect. I love it. Well, when the decision was made to plant these trees, where did I'm going to guess it was your parents' decision to plant these varieties at first. And they were being trained. Where were they being trained at for cider?
They had taken some classes through the Washington State University Extension Lab up in Mount Vernon, back when Peter Mitchell, English cider maker, was coming over like twice a year to the States to teach cider making classes, and
Okay.
Yeah, just kind of got wrapped up into it there, and then did a lot of reading, like Michael Phelps, holistic gardening, orcharding was a big influence, and yeah, just kind of learning as we go and coming up with different ideas to adapt to our situation.
Okay.
Like deer are a big problem kind of everywhere, but us being a small orchard, we didn't want to invest in like a ton of fencing. So we had this, I don't know if it's very common, but it is a deer fencing that came from, what is it? I think it's Wisconsin, and it's like 8 feet tall, and it blends in really well because it's all black, but it just kind of disappears into the orchard. But it was all forested land before we started the orchard. It was kind of a swampy forest of like alder and cedar and maybe a little bit of fir in there. And as we kind of picked the area to put the orchard of where we'd have good sun exposure and a good wind protection and everything. All those trees that came down, we happened to mill up on site, and that's what we built our whole trellis system with, and our fence is all wood that came off of the land. And I think it's a pretty unique aspect of nothing is really left.
Currently, how many acres of apples do you have in the orchard?
Just over an acre. It's all tightly espaliered. Just shy of 1,000 trees. None of them are over 7 feet tall. It's on a 4-wire system, and yeah.
Okay. I don't know that much about trellis work and all of that. What I do know, and I'll tell you what I think I know, and you tell me if I'm correct, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But when you work with a tree on a trellis, they tend to produce fruit a little bit faster than what I would think of as an apple tree, which is a freestanding tree that you could put a swing on when it's 40 years old. Am I correct that they can bear fruit? They bear fruit faster? Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, it was on a dwarfing rootstock. A lot of that energy, it's keeping that energy pretty low, and supposedly the trees will have a shorter lifespan, but we're not seeing that just yet.
Okay, that was my next question, or my next belief is that the trellis trees don't have the lifespan that a traditional tree does, but you're not seeing that.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
They've been in the ground for
19 years.
Yeah.
And so 3.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I let you stumble early, but now I'll help you out.
And we were always told maybe 25 years for these dwarfing trees, and just the only problem we're having is the voles that are coming out of the forest are attacking the roots. And the trees are still producing like crazy. And we're not seeing that drop yet that everybody, or that we have heard would happen with that type of orchard. So, yeah.
So, all right. So you have about an acre of trees in production. Does that supply all of your apple needs, or do you get apples from other orchards?
We definitely get apples from other orchards. It supplies, depending on the year, it can supply anywhere from 50 to 60% of our total production, which is still under 6,000 gallons a year. And we work with Rainshine Orchards down in south end of Willamette Valley, who provide us with our red flesh apple. Early red flesh, hidden rose, mountain rose, all are this apple. So it's kind of a multi-named
Okay.
thing. We also work with heirloom orchards in Hood River and Lazy J orchards in neighboring us out in Port Angeles, kind of in between Sequim and Port Angeles.
Okay.
He's been the one that we've worked with the longest, and I know some of his land is being shifted more towards Christmas trees right now because it's such less work, which is a shame because he's growing some great apples and be a big loss for the peninsula if they kind of all went away.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it. I mean, our production is pretty small, so we don't go for, unless something really neat comes up. We work with a Northwest Mobile Juicing that based out of Montana, who just kind of goes around to a bunch of different orchards and presses unique fruit. And so we work with him, and it's like, well, do you have anything organic that was really cool this year, or really high bricks, or tasted unique? And so we might bring some of that in kind of during the peak season. But our biggest thing is like, well, we're going to press once a year. And once those apples are done, we aren't bringing in anything out of cold storage. We aren't going to do all that because we feel the quality isn't there once it's kind of left the tree. And it's kind of, we're more harvest driven than anything else. So,
okay. When pondering which direction we're going, when you planted the trees, was the intention to be organic from the beginning? Or it was? Okay. What was
Absolutely.
the rationalization to go organic?
Just the state of the Americans' food system. I mean, everything is moving more towards, commodity and just not necessarily healthy for people. And we found that, even through all of its flaws, the National Organic Program, the NOP, is has a good mission, balancing its flaws, with corporate greed.
Every organization has flaws.
Yeah, and indeed. But it was mainly our ethos of like, well, we don't want to dump a whole bunch of chemicals on the ground to defoliate the leafy vegetation beneath the trees. And if we do that, then it's just a bunch of different problems that can persist from there. And we've kind of gone the opposite direction where it's like low intervention with these trees has made them stronger. Where we've seen orchards that were conventional, and then they're like, oh, well, now we're going to shift to organic. And all those years of being conventional has kind of weakened the tree. And those trees, they don't survive very well if they don't have all those inputs of, high nutrients in the soil. And just all the things now they need all that to protect themselves, instead of something like our process where it's like, we use fire as a, as a pest prevention. Like 2 or 3 times a year, we come out and, literally burn, under our trees. And that kind of keeps down the leafy, weeds and stuff that can damage the tree. We also found that our soil is so wet that it actually steams the underneath of our leaves, and we'll see like all of these bugs and everything dropping from the underside of our leaves, and we'll have birds flying in right behind the tractor that is burning them, and it's just a smorgasbord of cooked bugs for them.
Cooked bugs.
And So then they immediately clean up all that, like right after us. And it's more of we're working with the ecological system than trying to fight it. And yeah, I don't know.
This is the first time I've ever asked this question.
Uh-oh.
How are you using a tractor to burn everything? Walk me through, explain this to me, because I'm sitting here and I've got all these, there's a guy in overalls throwing matches on the ground. There's a guy with a flamethrower laughing and giggling. I don't think I'm right on any of these. So what is the...
You got two of them right.
Oh, I got two of them right. Okay. What did I get right?
Overalls, yes.
Okay.
Bear is usually in overalls. And it is a type of flamethrower that he's using. It's just a big torch that our trees, I mean, given our history of fighting wildland fires, we had old fire shelters that were, you can only use them for so many years. And so we cut them up and actually wrapped the base of our tree in them. And we use a propane torch in a small, like, riding lawnmower trailer that we'll just pretty much be driving along holding the torch on the ground and just kind of burning as we go, and just kind of idle through the orchard. It works for our scale. It's one of those things that's like, it's a brilliant idea, it works really well, but kind of
it wouldn't scale
larger,
to 100 acres.
Yeah, we couldn't really scale it without some kind of massive investment in new technology kind of thing, where I don't that's kind of where we found
but see, here's the thing. This is, everybody develops technology to the scale that they're operating at.
Exactly.
You don't need to have something, too big or too small. This is working. You guys have developed this. So I'm going to repeat what you just said, what my brain heard. You have a guy named Bear wearing overalls, driving a tractor with open flame.
Yes, that's you got it.
Good. Okay, cool. You're like, why am I talking to this guy? That's okay.
Nailed it on the first try.
Jeez, go think.
We usually do it like 2 to 3 times a year, and it works great. I mean,
there we go.
Yeah, we don't.
Let's go. Let's go back in time to the first year when you guys started your first year of production with that, making cider.
All right.
What was that? What do you remember the first year to be like?
Not much, honestly. I think at that time, I can't even remember where I was at that time. I remember lots of carboys and lots of just kind of tasting things, and we had an extra dry, which turned into our Pirate's Blank, and a bittersweet blend, which turned into our kind of late season estate blend, which is our Ember. And I can't remember a whole lot, honestly.
All right. Well, you mentioned early season and late season a couple of times.
Yes.
In your opinion, describe the differences between the early season cider and a late season cider.
So freshness. Okay. So think like our Ember. One of the descriptors I'd like to use in it is, it's more of a mind picture, or a picture in your mind of walking through an orchard, say in December, like early December, when all the apples have fallen to the ground, and it's you're nose is permeated with that smell of overripe apple.
Okay.
And that's kind of what that cider reminds me of, is like a very late season, like overripe, well ripened apple with a big tannic backbone, and just a touch of sweetness. While our early season, which would be more of our Pirates Plank, is going to be, it's going to be lighter on the palate, and like the acids are different. It's going to be a little higher acid. I wouldn't say it's high acid by any means, but it just slightly different, because most kind of early season apples like the Kingston Black are typically really well balanced. So they have good tannins, good sugars, and good acids, like higher acids, than like the late season, which is good tannins, good sugars, and lower acids.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a different experience.
Okay.
It's hard to describe it that way.
All right. But so your first year, basically, the Pirates Plank came out of the first year's experiments, if you will. Okay.
Definitely.
How did you come up with the name Pirates Plank?
It was a whiskey. Originally, we're going to be called the Whiskey Plank, and because it being Port Townsend, wooden boat, like Mecca, the Whiskey Plank is kind of the last plank you put on a wooden vessel. But the TTB didn't like that as a name on our labels. It saying whiskey, the Tax Trade Bureau. And the governing body for kind of labels. And
all right,
there's very strict things you can say on labels that
and that just didn't go that didn't get past the censors, if you will.
Yeah, because it said whiskey, and it was like, well, there's nothing to do with whiskey in this beverage, and you can't say whiskey because the whiskey lobby might come after you, all just silly little things. And
gotcha.
And so we kind of stuck with a plank, and it was just kind of like, oh well, it's a Pirates Plank, because it kind of, everybody, and it had the tagline of it'll rob you of your misconceptions, and because everybody's conception or everybody's idea of cider, even today, is like, oh well, it's sweet, it's that fall kind of drink thing that it's just like, it's the side dish to a main dish kind of thing. And we're like, no, that isn't what cider is historically across the world. Here's our Pirates Plank. It has great depth to it. It's a really unique drink. It can, anybody that likes a farmhouse saison or something like that would really dig this cider. And it just kind of came with that tagline of like, no, try this. You want something dry? Try this. This will rob you of your misconceptions. It's definitely come back to bite me a couple times where, at festivals, someone will walk up and go, oh, I want something dry. I'm like, okay, just pour it. I've literally had somebody it goes in their mouth and immediately came right back, hits my face.
What?
Pre-COVID time, it was a lot safer back then. Safer. And she was just like, oh, I'm so sorry. What was that? That it just like hit my tongue so weird. And I wasn't expecting it to be kind of that dry. Was that our dry? And I was just like, hey, try it. I poured her another cider that wasn't nearly as dry, and she was like, oh, that's perfect. And I was like, yeah, that's like a medium sweet, but Sure. So, yeah, the kind of misconception of dryness is something that we're still struggling with as an industry, but yeah. So,
well, let's pause there for a second, because most of your portfolio is, quote unquote, air quotes here, dry, right? Most.
Yeah, I mean,
most. Okay. It's not super sweet, not, So how did you go about educating the market that this beverage, this complex dry beverage, is not like some treetop apple juice that you're accustomed to, no offense to treetop apple juice, but I mean,
it has its place.
It has its place. And so if somebody is accustomed to a cider that is more like that, and you give them Pirate's Plank and they spit it in your face, but that's a tough sell, right? How did you educate the palate of your customer?
That's taken years.
Okay.
And yeah, geez, it's lots of tastings and lots of talking about cider, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we cider still hasn't we're still riding the coattails of many different beverage industries, and which we don't need to be. We're a very unique beverage that needs its own designation, but yeah, it just took lots of it. I hate to say it took lots of time acting like it's over, because I feel like every 7 years it's pretty much starting over.
Really?
That's what it feels like 5 to 7 years. So it's like, oh, because a lot of my work is going in and talking to buyers specifically, who I figure if I can give them the right information, they can disseminate that knowledge a lot easier than I can to all of their customers. And if I can get them excited about it, their customers will be excited about it. And every 5 to 7 years, I've seen a big flip in the industry. And it's like everybody that I worked on or had worked with is like, oh yeah, I'm moving on to something else. And, or it takes a global pandemic like COVID. that definitely caused one too. But yeah, it was just lots of like going in and talking to people and just going, listening to them and going, what are you tasting? Okay. I understand that. And it's like, no, it doesn't have Brett in it. That's it. You might get that as, from this type of, sure. And, just kind of listening to people and, just going, yeah, you might pick up some cheese in there. That's the, quintessential kind of bittersweet character is it's like a blue cheeseness, I guess. You could definitely pick that up. And yeah, just like educating them and going, that's correct. That's what you want. It doesn't have to be just the latest trendy flavor. These are all flavors coming directly from an apple. And it's like, here, why don't you try it with this chunk of cheese or, stuff like that, where it's like, just try it with a little piece of charcuterie or something like that. And it really opens up their eyes, or, especially people in like, bartenders will try this stuff and just it kind of blows their mind, or really opens their mind. A lot of times you get to see their mind start clicking when they're like, oh, is he like coming up with cocktails or something in their mind. They're like, oh, what if it goes like you pick up a little bit of botanical note off of this cider, and you're like, oh well, what if I blended it with this? And yeah, I think that's. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
well, it's what little I know is that cider makers like you guys versus other cider makers, just smaller single variety, approaching it differently, and versus maybe a more mass market approach. Okay, both are fine. I think both have their place. I don't have that educated of a palate, but I'll equate cider to like coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That really large coffee company in Seattle provided a great exposure for coffee to the marketplace, educated the public about coffee, and then all these small roasters went from there and did their thing with it that you can't necessarily do in mass production. And you wouldn't buy a $5 cup of coffee at your local Port Townsend coffee shop if it weren't for that large Seattle coffee company training you that you can, and so it did a lot of good. So, but those smaller roasteries, like I'm imagining smaller cider makers like yours, you have to educate, you have to share your products, you have to expose it and explain it to the public, because if they're expecting it to taste like treetop, they're taken by surprise, and you have to help them understand what they're tasting and appreciate those tasting notes.
For sure.
And which brings me to, you have a tasting room.
Yeah. Very, very, and we have a tasting hallway with big doors.
A tasting hallway. Well, on your website, it says room. So is this misinformation? Is your website?
I intentionally lied on the website.
A tasting hallway.
If it's windy and cold out, it's a tasting hallway. If it's a nice out and we open the doors, then it's an outdoor tasting room.
So is that for the 15 minutes that you have sun on July 15th that you open the doors?
Yep. They're very squeaky when we get that 15 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's open on the weekends, or it's open on Saturdays, I should say, from 12 to 5. We just opened it up again for the year, kind of March through November-ish. And yeah, very laid back, kind of grab a glass and just go sit at the picnic tables in the yard. It's adjacent to my folks' place. So they're just kind of, they're like, I guess I'll close the curtains today, kind of.
Oh, okay. All right. Is it Saturday again? Huh. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, that's
how how is the public when they come to the tasting room? What's the sort of experience that you've had there when somebody pulls up?
Everybody's great. I mean, for the most part, people are just looking we're not open very often, so they're excited to make it when we're open. Kind of that. And then, you drive in our driveway, and our cider house is a big, large structure, all made of wood, really nicely laid out. And it's like my folks' place is a log cabin. So you're driving in, you see the orchard to one side, you see this log cabin here, and this big wooden production facility, and the tasting room doors swung wide open. And
for that 15 minutes.
Well, yeah. and or it's raining and they just have to run in, and so I think it draws in that kind of like, oh, this is very serene.
Okay.
And it's rarely ever like super crowded, so it's very peaceful. More times than not, there's like a deer walking through the front yard and trying to steal your crackers or something. I mean, we get bobcats, we get owls, eagles, tons of ducks. We're geez, what is it called? Yeah, it's just kind of a nature preserve.
Okay. Right.
So unfortunately, it's not super dog friendly, but we'll just ask people to kind of keep the pups in the car. Yeah, it's very, very serene. I think that's the best descriptor that I can have of our place.
Okay. And how long has the tasting room been? Oh, I mean, when did you guys start the tasting room? Where I'm going with this line of questioning is, how did you start selling your product at retail? What was the initial and?
Our tasting room, I think it was maybe 2009-ish.
Okay.
And at that same time, we were like trying to do farmers markets and we were just like spitballing, just throwing everything out there and seeing what kind of stuck. Because by that time, there was like, I want to say maybe a dozen cideries that had started up in Washington, and we were all kind of getting together and like, trying to figure out how to grow this industry. And it was all very communal feeling. And so we were all just kind of spitballing and working off of each other. Like Whole Foods was very responsive and brought in a whole bunch of local ciders. And a lot of the local kind of beer bottle shops brought in a bunch, and that was kind of like the beginning of it. And then you had, after that, then you saw the explosion in more of a national presence, and then like Angry Orchard came on and had their massive sales teams go out and pick up all of these tap spots, pretty much, like bumping beer handles to put on more cider lines. And that's what really like kind of saw a big pivot in the market. And it was like, it was amazing. Like that's kind of pushed it to that next level where we were all just like, what are we doing? And we need to get some shelf spots and, chasing this minuscule amount of space that we were all given. And then having a behemoth come in and just like force every bar from a dive to like high quality eating establishment. Now everybody is familiar with cider, and we've all now kind of bumped Angry Orchard back off, and it's all shifting a lot more towards like local producers, at least in Washington is what I'm seeing. And we're really lucky, especially in Washington, to have most places have adapted to up to like 2 or 3 of their draft lines to cider. And they'll have like a high-end cider line like us, where our kegs are pretty expensive, to a more of a pint style cider, and lots of flavors, adjuncts, and just more of the modern cider take. So it has that balance of like helping the customer understand, oh yeah, there's kind of 2 different worlds, and try them both. And so, yeah, I think I went off on a different tangent there. I can't remember.
No, you did and you didn't. See, my question wasn't very well thought out. First off, I was asking when the tasting room was opened, but I also wanted to talk about how you guys brought the cider to market. So you started, as what I'm hearing from a lot of people, is farmers markets.
Yeah.
And then small distribution.
Yeah.
And
Definitely tried that.
yeah. Do you know the family that runs Union Hill Cider in East Wenatchee?
We've met a couple times,
Okay.
but not
Really nice people. And I was talking to Andrew, and he's got his pilot's license. Okay. And so we were talking, and he said, yeah, I flew over from Wenatchee to Cle Elum to deliver cider to a local bar in Cle Elum. I said, well, that's not really exactly, economically viable, but it sure sounds like fun. And he's like, yeah, it was, but see, that's how, they're solving the distribution the way they're solving it. I mean, they I won't say flying, because that sounds like they do it more often, but they have flown cider and they've delivered it by air.
It's definitely, yeah. Especially when you're small, it's like every account that you work with is, you view it as something special. So there's been times where I'm like, because all of our draft is stored out in Port Townsend. So I'm like scheduling trips, going out there and then driving back and then delivering on this side of in Seattle. And it's like, go out there, pick up what I thought was everything, driving back, get on the ferry, come back. And I'm like, oh, I forgot that order. Turn around, get back on the ferry, drive back out, do that trip over and again. And it's just like, I can't, I don't want to mess these people up because I'm not getting them their order, because they can just as easily go to some distributor, and because we're self-distributed. So it's just like, yeah, they can just as easily, call up one of their reps who will have it there in no time, but they have chosen to go with self-distribution, which is always a risk. And yeah.
Okay. So you physically are based in the Seattle area?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where I live, and then back.
So one of the things that was confusing on the website was you guys were doing deliveries in Seattle, and I'm like,
oh yeah, that's me. So I'm out on the peninsula once a week, and and then I'm out on the road, kind of delivering, a couple times a week. So
at the time that we're recording this in late April of 2022. Where are some places that your ciders are available to the public in Washington?
Not many. Let's see. You down in Tacoma, you'll get like Tacoma Boys, Peaks and Pints, and like Incline Cider House, kind of working our way up. You get like Slow Boat Tavern over in Hillman City. You get, like some, in West Seattle, you get like Best of Hands Brewing, you get, Beverage Place Pub, Good Society Brewing, and then Capitol Hill, you get like Capitol Cider, and, Leschi, you get like Leschi Market, and, now I'm thinking on the east side, you get like Redmond Whole Foods and Kirkland Whole Foods, Whole Foods Roosevelt. Yeah, I'm just kind of bouncing around here.
Right. Do you do anything east of the Cascades?
No, we don't. Not right now. I do mainly Bellingham to Tacoma is just because everything. It's that shift. It's that thing that I brought up earlier where it's every couple of years a buyer will move on. And for a company like us, where we're at that upper end of the spectrum, a new buyer coming on, unless they have a relationship with either me or our brand personally, they will most likely axe the highest costing thing to make it. It's like, oh yeah, we got rid of the high cost stuff, so we're gonna definitely seen that with some grocery stores too, where it's like, oh, new buyers, or oh, we got to make room for more seltzer, so we're gonna axe the high end stuff, and it's like, oh, great.
Well, no, when we talked on the phone, before we sat down to record this, I'm wondering if you couldn't maybe swap out your hot piss and vinegar for. Sorry, we got to talk about that. That was. I'm just wondering, if they want to cut the high cost, can you swap? Can you sell that to them?
That was a one-off.
Okay, so all kidding aside, yes, let's please recap that story for me and for the audience this time, because that was really funny, and I know we'll enjoy this.
Oh, absolutely. Being in Port Townsend, we had the opportunity to take part in possibly one of the best tasting experiences anybody could have in the brewing world. It's called Strange Brew Fest out in Port Townsend, kind of early February every year, pre-COVID. And it's a wild ride. Like anything goes here. Don't expect your normal IPAs. Don't expect your just a barrel aged stout. Don't expect the unexpected. I think that's what the Strange Brew Fest is all about. And it's just all about like community and just growing that beer community. Years ago, I can't even remember what year it was. We were just trying to come up with some fun things, and we were making vinegar at the time, and we were like, oh well, we can do this. What about doing like a spicy shrub thing and serving it warm, and we could call it hot piss and vinegar, and that's what we did. We brought a crock pot in. See, I can say Muscadet d'Adiep, but I can't say crock pot. I can't say crock pot. And so we're just like, oh well, yeah, let's do the hot piss and vinegar, and we can do. I think we called it. What did we call it? ISIS at the time. I probably wasn't the best name, but it was like, is it cider? And it was a whole bunch. It was a cider that tasted like hot tamales. And I mean, it was weird. It tasted exactly like hot tamales. It super strange. And so we were like serving these two ciders side by side. And, definitely got some really weird responses from the hot piss and vinegar.
But nobody spit it in your face.
It's true. But I didn't serve for the whole night, so maybe. Okay, maybe. And hot tamales did extremely well. I mean, the lines for these beverages were insane, and I ended up going home a little early. Like I think it was like 11 or something like that. And I think pouring went on to 1. I can't remember. Again, years ago. Right. Brain fog. And so the folks that were pouring for us call us at really early in the morning, and they're like, hey, we just got like second or third place at People's Choice, and it was all about how many tickets we had brought in. And to my knowledge, we're still the only non-beer person that has ever brought home the medal from Strange Brew Fest. And it was from that year of hot piss and vinegar and hot tamales. So I guess there was something about it, about those two then.
So needless to say, I don't see those on your shopping cart on your website. I'm not seeing those available.
Those were very, very special one-off releases that I have intentionally left off our website.
All right. Well, let's talk about. Okay. This is gonna be a tough question, and there's no wrong answer, by the way.
42. No,
done. We can drop the mic. We're done. What's your personal favorite of Alpine Fire Cider?
Depends on what I'm doing or what I'm eating.
Okay.
Geez. So, Easter, I made like a small ham for my family and I, and just, something fun. But afterwards, of course, there's leftover ham. Made like a ham sandwich and had our dabinette with that ham sandwich. And it was fantastic. One of those kind of things where it's just like, it's simple food, goes really well with these kind of rustic ciders. And, but if I'm just like cracking a bottle, it's most likely our Pirate's Plank.
Okay.
It's kind of my go-to. It's our flagship cider. And yeah, it's just super dry. It yet still like fruity, and it has great like leather qualities to it. It's got a touch of salinity, that being where we are, like we're I want to say 250 feet above sea level, and pretty much right on the bluff of overlooking Discovery Bay. So we have a lot of that kind of fog rolling in, maritime influence. It's kind of permeated the soil. It shows up like that saltiness shows up in our ciders, and it's really fun to taste. Okay. So, yeah, I think those, it really just depends on what I'm doing.
Okay. What's another good food pairing? What else? When we talk about, cider and pairing it with food. So let's say I invite myself over, and you say, all right, I'm going to sit down with Scott. Since he invited himself over, I'm going to show him what's what. What would you pair with, say, your Northern Spy?
Northern Spy. That one's it's mineral driven. I'm trying to think what.
We already got Dabinate with the ham sandwich.
Yeah.
sounds just fine to me.
Yeah. I'm just trying to remember what I had.
Well, let me approach it a different way. I'm going to throw out some food choices. You give me a pairing. Okay?
Okay, Northern Spy.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking like Lay's potato chips, maybe some mushrooms, and sesame noodles.
Interesting.
Okay. All things that I think would go well with. It's a very light and crisp cider. You don't want anything overpowering it. I think that the saltiness of the Lay's, the earthiness of the mushrooms, and just that kind of umami flavor of the noodles, all would be very complementary to the Northern Spy. I think that's. Okay.
What do you have that would hold up, say, against a steak? Or not against, that's, it's not, but what would be a good,
I would do something a little more bold. Pirate's Plank might actually hold up to that, but I would maybe lean more towards our Ember, which is a lot more tannic driven. Yeah, or maybe that's what I would do. Probably Ember. Just because of the tannins in it. Maybe our Cinders, which is our Method Champenois. But they would be different on different aspects of like that has like really nice crisp acidity to it, great bubbles. That would definitely cut through the fattiness of a steak. Yeah.
One thing on your cart that just seems a little out of place to me is this Calypso barrel aged fruit cider. just seems a little. Why?
Yeah, it was definitely so. In my interpretation of cider, strictly my own interpretation, is cider is made from apples harvested at their peak ripeness, pressed and fermented, and then left to mature throughout the year with nothing else added to it. I mean, you might add some fermentation aids, just a very, I think apples have so much to give that we don't need to be adding a lot to it to make a very special beverage. And same with like pears. Pears are kind of the same, in the same boat. In the modern cider world, it is very common to use kind of cheap, very cheap, just commodity, overgrown apples, some might say, or I would say, and add, whether they be local ingredients or or just fruit concentrate, and to make something fruity and almost mask the apple character.
All right.
That's definitely more of a modern take of cider. I mean, it's been done forever, but there's been no industry that is based off of an adjunct that is added to a base product, like a wine. Sure, they've always had wine coolers. They've always been there, one way or the other. Like fruit wine has always been there, but it wasn't what the perception of wine was built off of. I mean, beer, it always had its kind of weird adjunct brews, but it was always a lager and an ale, as long as they were well made. That's what the industry is built off of. I mean, like whiskey, the industry wasn't built off of a peanut butter whiskey. It was built off of just a really nicely distilled and aged product. And so,
you mean, are you telling me that like cotton candy vodka's not?
Nah, that's vodka. That might have been what there was.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just derailed you there.
Yeah, in my interpretation, I think to build an industry, you start with the most basic ingredients, and so that's been our interpretation of cider making. Is like, hey, if people really want to drink and enjoy cider, they should drink and enjoy the base product of cider, and that is the apples, not hibiscus, habanero, huckleberry. That's a cocktail. That's not necessarily what cider is in my eyes. But it is what's driving our current market. It is hands down. It's what's selling. It's like majority of the volume is that kind of innovative. I'm going to put big quotations around that word innovative, and it's what's pushing the market. And we're like, well, we have to do something to stay relevant. And my wife really liked blackberries, still does. I mean, sure. And I was like, well, we were trying to think of something that would be kind of hand in hand, a shadow of Pirate's Mike, and we were trying to think of another one to be ocean themed in our labeling. And we're like, well, we can do something like Calypso came out. And it's like, yeah, that works with the name. So we were thinking blackberries because being in the Northwest, they're easy to get. And we typically use like pippins, like Newtown pippins in them. And that's very commonly grown. Nice heirloom apple. And we're like, well, it would be fun to do something with barrels and just see how it goes. And I just happened to run into the folks from Bull Run Distilling down in Portland as we were kind of coming up with this cider, and they were just releasing their barrel aged rum at the time. And it was just like kind of serendipity. Talked to them. They were like, "Oh yeah, we don't really deal with the home brewers." And I was like, "No. Here's my card. I'm with the cidery." And they're like, "Oh yeah, come on down. We'll hook you up with some barrels." And so we just kind of did that, and it's definitely one of our. It's within our top 3 selling ciders. Like,
okay.
It's just won, what is it? I think Cider Craft, it just won like a double gold or something.
Okay.
Last year it was featured for 4 months, 3 months at Canless Restaurant. And so it's I don't know. It's one of those, I love to hate it.
Okay.
But
that's fair.
I deliver more of that cider than I do. I mean, it's pretty close with like Pirate Spike. They're both in 500 mil, and they move pretty similarly.
Okay.
But it's amazing how well it moves, and I do a lot of work promoting Pirate Spike, and I do no work promoting that other cider.
Gotcha.
So
well, let's shift some gears here real quick. So when you're not delivering or forgetting and having to go back, you know, and when you're, you know, what do you drink when you're not drinking cider?
Usually beer. Like,
okay.
It depends again what I'm doing. I typically have like a Pilsner, some kind of craft Pilsner in my fridge, or like a farmhouse, some kind of farmhouse 750 in my fridge, are the two kind of common.
Okay.
Yeah, IPAs if I'm out working in my shop. Yeah, I don't know. I tend to drink beer. I also really enjoy wine. Bourbon and Scotch are big fans. I've recently, we did a small barrel project with Big Gin Distilling here in, and kind of really have been really enjoying their gin recently, especially their peated gin is out of this world good. It's one of my favorite drinks, just to kind of evening touch of ice in it and just a shot of that specific gin is a go-to.
Now, during our conversation today, I keep seeing you drink from this gallon-sized container of coffee. Kidding, it's not a gallon.
Yeah, coffee. I typically, there's a roaster called Seven. Is it Seven Roasting? Seven. I can't remember exactly.
Where are they based out of?
I think they're in West Seattle, actually.
Okay.
But I initially had their stuff up on Finney Ridge when they were up there, and that's just my the beans that it's my go-to kind of. I used to do.
I'm always looking for good coffee.
Yeah, for
always.
Sure. I used to do a bunch of work with a group called the Surfrider Foundation, and we had a bunch of meetings. Like, they offered up their space to us to hold our meetings, and so that's where I was introduced to them. And yeah,
that's your.
And if I'm just Okay, so yeah, their 7 coffee roasters is kind of my go-to for my
7 coffee roasters.
My beans when I'm at home. If I'm going out and just grabbing a cup on the road, I usually swing by like Cafe Ladro or Lighthouse, depending on where I am.
Solid.
And
solid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or 7-Eleven.
So when you're not drinking 7-Eleven?
Yeah.
Well, you got you're keeping it with a theme. 7-Eleven. Okay. Well, I can respect that, and especially if you tell me you're putting in the, 3 of those packets of, artificial creamer to add some character.
It's like that, the old graveyard when you go to like a fountain sodas, you just get all the creamers and just dump them all in. Like one of each flavor, just top it off. It's like, great.
God. Oh, that may be the most disgusting thing I've heard. That may be the most disgusting thing I've heard on this show so far. Oh my God. That's awful. And I tip my cap. So when you're not doing cider, what do you like to do for fun? What do you and the family like to do for fun and excitement?
Oh boy. I've got a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they keep us running. My degree is in photography, like specializing in like nature, landscape photography. I really enjoy doing that. Haven't had a lot of time to do it recently. I dabble in like social graphic design, and it being more of a hobby right now, I kind of still enjoy doing that. Geez. Used to.
Well, what are the 3 and 9-year-old into? What are the 3-year-old and the 9-year-old into? What's fun for them?
Actually, I just getting all of our bikes tuned up for the summer.
Okay.
Just yeah, got my old bike all tuned up. Got my daughter is like in between bikes, so I'm trying to move her up into a bigger bike and move my son to her old bike, and it's like they're both at that stage where their feet could barely touch the larger pedals. So it's like, right. All right, perfect timing.
Gotcha.
But looking forward to doing some bike rides this summer.
All right.
And yeah. You stay really busy. Enjoy being out in the woods away from people. So the more time I can do that, the better.
Okay.
Yeah. But usually my getting away from people is unfortunately in the van on the road. So surrounded by people in our own little boxes.
Right.
Polluting as much air as we can, right?
There you go. So what didn't I ask you that I should have?
Let's see. So yeah, going back to organics a little bit, we got our first certification in 2005. We were the second certified organic cidery in the nation. First west of the Rockies. Still one of only a handful that are out there. And that kind of comes down to, it's not just, certified organic apples. It's also, we have to have everything processed organically, a lack of fermentation aids, like in our blends. It's a multi-layered kind of thing. It's definitely been a feather in our cap, but also a big hindrance to our growth. I think it's a lot of extra work that, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. I think that's pretty close to about it. It's been interesting just seeing how the industry has grown. I think on our phone call, I had mentioned that it was like 115 cideries. I revisited that number, and it's, I on that number, I had included a bunch of wineries and breweries that I knew were making cider as well. So if I reduce it down to like 90, it looks like we're about 90 cider producers in Washington.
Wow.
Which is pretty huge. I mean, for the industry still being pretty young, and we're not talked about a whole lot, which is kind of weird. Like in the, the food and wine and the all that kind of magazines, they seem to forget about our side of the industry and prefer to talk about seltzers for some reason.
Yeah. Well, where can people find out more about Alpenfire online?
Let's see. Our website, alpenfirecider.com is,
okay.
I try to keep it updated as much as possible. Next up would be probably our Instagram, which is, again, just search Alpenfire Cider. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, but they aren't updated super regularly. It's kind of just my folks and I, and neither of us really like doing it. We'll occasionally toss on some stories or some pictures, but it's like, when you're working, you just kind of are focused on working instead of going, oh, I should take a picture of this. And then.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that the challenge of all small businesses is, I didn't realize I needed to keep my entire career, Instagram ready.
Yeah.
and constantly be, photo documenting me living my best life.
Yeah. I didn't realize people wanted to know that.
Go figure. So,
but I think our big news is we are planning a tasting room in Seattle, and just something small and just kind of easy to manage, and just give people a little bit easier chance to find us.
Not trying to put you on the spot, but when is that? How far out in the horizon is that?
Probably early next year is what.
Okay.
I mean, I was going to try to get it done by this year, but with what I've heard about how, getting everything cleared with the city and, building anything right now, a build out would probably set me back quite a bit. So I'm guessing early next year is what I'm
okay.
Fingers crossed, shooting for. Probably South End, West Seattle, Soto, Hillman City, maybe Burien, somewhere, Columbia City, something like that. And good neighborhood feel.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that's
very good. Well, I will wrap this up by saying thank you for taking the time to sit with me today and talk about Alpenfire and hot piss and vinegar. I just never thought I would be talking about that, or mixing all the creamers together. I mean, we've really covered the gamut of topics here today.
Hey, it's innovative.
Innovative. Innovative. But again, thank you for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to keeping an eye on you guys and seeing what's, I'm looking forward to seeing this tasting room get launched.
Let me know when you're on this side of the mountains, and we'll get you some cider.
I will take you up on that. So, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.